get into what promises to be an enriching session, I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists, Mondli Mbele, Chief Director for Food Security at the Department of Social Development, Peter Ramoloja, Acting Director for Food Security at the National Department of Agriculture, Wade Parker, Program Lead for Agroecology for Food Sovereignty and Climate Justice at the Surplus People Project, SPP, Professor Rena Swart, Nutrition Program Leader for DSI NRF Center for Excellence in Food Security from the University of Western Cape, and Peter T. Jacobs, Senior Research Director at Triple E Division and co-convener for Hub 3, Equitable Food Values Chains, at the Human Sciences Research Council, HSRC. It's an honor to have you all here. Now, while the need for equitable and ecological food futures is commonly knowledgeable and accepted, there is evidence to show that countries like South Africa must do more to achieve this goal. As a minimum, transitioning food and nutrition policies in this direction will require holistic and integrated approaches coupled with constructive engagements that involve all food value chain and stakeholders. But could each of the panelists please give a reflection on what the theme Working Together for Zero Hunger in South Africa towards equitable and ecological food futures means for them and from the viewpoint of their sector? Starting with the Wade Parker.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the space. Important topics. It is a critical time for South Africa. Speak about these issues around the food system. We need to have these conversations, and for South Africa, it cannot be business as usual. So we know that when we talk about hunger, we tend to focus on feeding people, and we don't ask the deeper questions on why people are going hungry in the first place. So these are the conversations that we need to have in terms of food security and access to food. We should ask the questions around who has the decision-making power, who controls the land, who controls the resources, who controls the seeds, who controls the systems that we are currently in. So hunger, we are in the position that it's not about a food shortage, but it is about inequalities in the country. And speaking about the themes, zero hunger, the goals around it, and the theme for 2025 around World Food Day, it is business as usual, and we are not going deeper into the questions of inequalities, inequalities that really comes from the legacies of colonialism, apartheid that continues today. So these are the issues that we have to address. So when we do say it's business as usual, it is not a technical problem when we do speak about food insecurity, but it is a political one. So we cannot stay in the cycle of just talking about better collaboration with private sector, but how do we take that shift towards food sovereignty? How do we look at how do we put the power and the control back into the hands of the communities, of the people, so that they can feed the communities? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our opinion from the Center of Excellence in Food Security. My comments will come from a public health nutrition perspective. So that would be, how do we ensure the best possible nutrition for every single person in the country? It is a basic right or a basic need, food, and nutrition is a basic right, especially for children. But we don't achieve that in South Africa as a whole. We know the prevalence of stunting. That's where children don't grow to their potential. And on the other side of the same coin, we have people who are overweight or obese. And the cause of these two problems are in actual fact the same food system that we have. Add to that kind of in between is then the lack of vitamins and minerals, what we refer to as micronutrients, that can affect and occur at the same time as undernutrition as well as obesity. So what's the problem, or my opinion about the problem in the food system, and why healthy nutrition is not delivered to the people? I've got a couple of points that I would like to raise there. And one for me is that those born since 1980 in South Africa has been born to what we refer to as an obesogenic food environment. The reason for that, because our food system has changed so much that very few people actually are involved in production of their own food, the food they consume. We buy most of our foods. So the food system is heavily commercialized. And as a result of that commercialization, profit is kind of the primary objective of people involved in the food system, whether that is from the harvesting to maybe utilization of the produce and making something else in a commercial setting. Profit is the primary outcome. Now, if you want to maximize your profit, you would try and create products that are as tasty as possible. And in order to make sure that your profits stay high, you will use the profits you've generated to market your product to people so that it becomes highly desirable. So unfortunately, I think that commercialization of the food system works very detrimentally at the moment on our health specifically. Because it increased the price of food. So those with very low incomes, and we've got a mass of people, almost half of the population who live below the poverty line, they can't afford the basic foods. Those who do have more money, and even those with low incomes, as a result of this whole process of commercialization, marketing, and profit, more unhealthy food has become very cheap, cheaper than your healthy versions. So in actual fact, it's easier to eat unhealthy than what it is to eat healthy. And that, of course, contribute to both undernutrition as well as overnutrition. I mentioned poverty. And I should add to that our unequal society, as you have mentioned it. As a result of the unequal society, it's easy to find marketing objectives that create desirability and aspirational value to certain foods. And unfortunately, those aspirational values are not placed on the healthy option, but the tastiest option and the most convenient option and the one that we think everybody eats because that's what the marketing tells us. So that's my opinion about what are problems within the food system. Thank you.
Thank you. I think coming from a social development side of things, first and foremost, we have too many people in our country that find themselves living below the food poverty line. And as a result, the state now has to protect those. And hence, we've seen a growing number of people that are dependent on a state support for survival. We are talking about 253 billion, covering over 30 million people. That's of course, the recent growth was due to the Social Relief of Distress Grant during the COVID period, which since has not been withdrawn because those are the unemployed sitting at home, no income. And if you take that away from them, let alone the impact of the COVID period and the recent disasters that we have faced. So poverty is the biggest challenge in our country. And if then we have that situation economically, there is no growth, there is high levels of unemployment, youth with all the potential are not able to create livelihoods, opportunities, it then becomes difficult to put food on the table. We are of the view that we have to explore means to make sure that nobody goes to bed hungry, right? Of course, some of the things we've complicated them. I do believe that we have to go back to the basics. Breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding to protect those children, deal with issues of malnutrition at a critical phase of development, children taken care of, healthy, immunized in education's functional school nutrition program, and we stand a chance to have adolescents that are well developed, because a malnourished mother will likely give us, and then you just have a perpetual cycle of malnutrition in our community or in our nation. Stunting levels have been concerning, and of late, the issues of child mortalities we've seen in some parts of our country, those are concerning for us. And then also foodborne illnesses that we have seen of late. Beyond what are we eating, how are we eating it, the entire food system in terms of food safety and quality assurance to make sure that we feed our nation healthy and nutritious food. So as social development, we can keep growing the social protection provisions, but at some point we need a functional economy. We need food production at every level, household, commercial production, and then make food available, accessible, nutritious for us to have a healthy nation. That's our perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you very much for inviting us to this very important conversation. From the viewpoint of the HSRC, we very much approach it as providing evidence-informed solutions to food value chain or food systems problems. We work on the evidence generation side, the evidence dissemination side, and ensuring that this evidence gets utilized. And that has brought us into contact with all food value chain or all food systems actors, both in our own environment, the academic environment, the evidence production environment, the data environment, as well as the environment where we have to work with other actors. And as an organization, we work primarily with two categories of actors in the food value chain. The first actor would be mainly government departments that would require the kind of evidence to inform their interventions. And then quite a lot of civil society groups would also require us to generate evidence to find solutions to specific areas that may concern them. So in that frame, it sort of brought us in touch with fellow academics and also, especially through civil society, with communities, because civil society groups are directly involved with communities. And that process is about, for us, to see how can we work together with all these actors, our peers within the university systems, within research entities, and the other actors within the food value chain to find solutions to food value chain problems. Now, whether the food value chain problems are emerging from the side of nutrition, the healthy nutrition on the outside of the spectrum, which is really the community health issue. An unhealthy community is likely to overburden a health system, and nutrition can play a critical role in that. We saw that during the COVID-19 period, and that was critical. But what the COVID-19 period helped us to identify, if we don't have the right evidence, the right data, the right indicators of who is hungry, what kind of hungry experience there is, we wouldn't know what to do. We may find a solution that, okay, we're only going to urban areas because it's easy to distribute food parcels in urban areas. But that may not be the pressure point of hunger experiences. And then the most critical area that we've discovered, at least in the last decade and a half, is the area of the quality of evidence utilized to guide policy and civil society interventions. The quality of evidence for us requires a lot of upgrading at all levels. There are especially two levels of upgrading, not only the identification and geographic targeting, but also increasing evidence on the broader food value chain functionality linked to the environment. In recent times, we became increasingly aware that at every segment of the food value chain, there are problems linked to environmental questions that we may have ignored in the past. At the consumption end, for example, people throw away food. The food ends on dump sites. Right? And the dump sites generate harmful gases to the climate and global warming. On the production side, you can go through the same sequence of issues. So for us, it is about finding these holistic solutions and producing evidence to that end. So the HSRC at the moment is heavily involved in finding a dashboard, an evidence dashboard that can help us with all data inputs for these holistic solutions that we're trying to find, to know who is hungry, are they having not access to food, or is there a hidden hunger problem, which is the nutritional deficits. And at the same time, on the production end, the distribution and the processing end, we want to find these holistic solutions. So for us, it's all about evidence to improve the ways in which we live and working with all the actors in food value chains.
Thank you. From the agricultural perspective, in terms of trying to reduce food insecurity, you remember that in 2013 there was we developed the food and nutrition security policy with the Department of Social Development, which was approved by Cabinet. And they also had a report on malnutrition for children under the age of 5, which was then also presented to Cabinet. And Cabinet directed that the departments or sectors that are dealing with food insecurity need to develop a plan that deals with food security. It was on the basis of the increasing food security that we've seen in the country, and how do you then attend to the situation of food insecurity in the country? And as a result, we developed what we call the Food and Nutrition Security Plan in 2018. The Food and Nutrition Security Plan, which had about 6 strategic objectives. Strategic objective number 1 was on governance, the institution of food security councils. Strategic number 2 was on the linking of smallholder farmers to local food value chains, facilitation of participation of smallholder farmers to local food value chains. That is, it was not only smallholder farmers. You realize that the problem of food insecurity, it is a household level. Now, how do you then encourage, how do you improve the food security situation at the household level? It's if there's production at the household level, and the households are participating in the local value chains. Now, as such, the department has developed programs that support smallholder and subsistence farmers. Your CASP through Ilimalitzima that supports the farmers with production inputs, mechanization, for improved production. That is that is the strategy objective 2 of the plan. But then we had the strategy objective 3, which was led by DSD, social protection, and DBE, school nutrition program, and strategy objective 4, which has been led by the Department of Health, which focuses on nutritional issues, and strategy objective 5, which was the development of the food security monitoring system. And because of that, the HSRC was commissioned to conduct a study. That study resulted in the National Food Security Survey. The National Food Security Survey says, though there might be food security pockets in but you still have food insecurity pocket inside those provinces that have got food security. Those that do say they're food secure, but you still have issues of food security and malnutrition. And that study helped us to pinpoint where the issues are. Then we are saying, as part of the department to achieve zero hunger and for everybody to participate in the food value chain, what are you doing in terms of that? It's not only the Department of Agriculture that is involved in that. The Department of Social Development is also involved, the Department of Basic Education, Department of Health in terms of food fortification that are involved in. But besides that, you also have Department of Small Business. What is it that you're doing in terms of entrepreneurship development in those areas? Now, it's a holistic approach that says food security is not a function of production. It's a function of all other actors involved in the food value chain. Now, besides the plan and what came out of the National Food Security Survey, we also involved in the coordination of the food systems transformation. You realize you cannot, as government alone, be able to transform the food system. The food system that is characterized by both malnutrition and obesity, which is abnormal. You find in the shelves, supermarket shelves, the situation is that it's such that it's a 60-40 ratio. You have 60% of unhealthy foods, ultra processed, and 40% of healthy foods. And in the meetings that we had with the industry, they said, but why is the situation? The industry says the situation is like that because we make more money. The point that we're making, that from unhealthy food, that's where the industry makes money. And we are saying, okay, but that cannot be the situation. Now, as the country, we have in 2021 decided on the pathway to change the food system, to say, bring all the actors in the food system, see that the situation changes. And I'll just read the pathways that we've chosen as a country for the transformation of the food system. One of the pathways was the enhancement of local food production for local consumption of safe and nutritious indigenous foods. Where you see all those pockets of malnutrition and food insecurity, we need to encourage the production, the planting of indigenous crops, because we know that those are nutrition dense crops that can assist us in terms of reducing food insecurity in the country. And the second one is the promotion of social, economic, environmental resilience. You know, Peter was talking about how food that's not, you know, the households that are throwing food ends up with the dumping site, increasing your greenhouse gas emissions. Now, how do we deal with that in terms of the food system? And the third pathway was the facilitation of inclusive and competitive value chains. You know that in the country, the food system is just that it kicks the vulnerable out. And who are the vulnerable that the food system kicks out? It's your subsistence smallholder farmers that are not participating in the local food value chains, but it also kicks out the informal traders. We know that informal traders, you know, it showed during COVID that they're playing a very important role in the food system. But the food system is not able to accommodate your informal traders. Women, children, and youth. Those are the people that play a very important. The women, you know, if you look at the number of women that are involved in agriculture, we have more of them in the 3 provinces of Limpopo, KZN, and Mpumalanga. And that's where you find the in terms of food security. We talk about the province like Limpopo. It's a poor province, but in terms of food security, because there are more people that are involved in agriculture, they're able to produce their own food. Now, those are some of the efforts that we are taking as the Department of Agriculture. Of course, it's not our program. We are also in, other social actors are involved in this work. Your DSD, Department of Health, Department of Education, all actors in the food system. Department of Environmental Affairs is involved in the work, and the other one was the integration of promotion of integrated food governance legislation, which then says we have a plethora of policies. What policies are best suited for the transformation of the food system? Now, in this work, you know, you're working with farmers. You know, we're working with seed producers. You're working throughout the food value chain until the dumping side. That's how you try to transform the food system and to ensure that the situation of over and under nutrition it's managed in the country in transforming the food security, the food system in South Africa. Additionally, we are busy now with the food and nutrition security, a new iteration of the new food and nutrition security plan, 2024-2029. We're thinking that plan should be about 10 years. Now, the plan seeks to take the food systems lens, so that you look at the whole food value chain. Instead of, you know, it was compartmentalized, you have all departments that are participating in, but you take the system, the food systems lens, to try to deal with issues of food insecurity. I think from our side, that's how we're trying to ensure that we have a food secure country, but you have a system that supports healthy eating, because besides that education in terms of nutrition and health, you will have overconsumption of certain foods and underconsumption of certain foods. It has been shown that in South Africa, in terms of protein consumption, we're about 118 kgs per person. We're at almost the same level as the USA. A developing country versus a developed country. That's why we have similar nutritional problems, non-communicable disease, because of the high consumption of protein sources that in the country that we're also consuming. Is that plus the energy? The energy consumption and the protein consumption in this country is high. That's why you have to take, participants in the food value chain, so that you are able to balance, the consumption of nutritious and non-nutritious food. The extra refined foods, I think that's the problem that we're having in the country. The amount of salt and sugar in our foods. That's what is causing the problem in the country, and that's how we trying to, as the department, with other partners, to transform the food security, food system in the country to achieve zero hunger. Thank you.
And thank you all for your inputs. Now, Ramaloja and Bele, as you are from the government and public sector, and to the rest of the panelists, if you have anything to add to any of the questions, feel free to do so and jump right in. Now, in what ways have you been working with different food chains, value chain stakeholders before, and since the national FNS policy came into effect in 2013-14, could you share with us some highlights of your experiences?
Let me start. I think first, if you look at most of social development interventions in this country, the service delivery model is very much towards working through civil society organizations, NPOs. In the main, be it you looking at welfare programs, even food and nutrition security, when you look at community nutrition and development centers, home community-based care centers, the luncheon clubs for the elderly, all those, we have a network of about 3,606 centers, and all those are run by non-government organizations. So we pretty much work through community-based organizations, but also we have been working closely with the industry as well through the CGSA, Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, in the main trying to coordinate issues of surplus food distribution to enable the poor access to food. And of course, we work closely as government departments. We work together with health on issues of nutrition education, which is very critical for our people to know how to deal with food, how to provide nutritious food each time they have an option to make choices. Yes, at times the limited resources will force you to go for cheaper, convenient, easy to put on the table, but let's have empowered nation to make informed decisions. So there we work with the Department of Health. Even now during the National Nutrition Week, we have a number of programs we are rolling out in provinces. Yeah, of course, we have Peter has alluded to the National Technical Working Group. We work with academia, research, development partners, and sector departments, trying to coordinate all our interventions under the guidance of the policy and the national plan centered around those various strategic objectives we are trying to achieve. Yeah, so we do try, we are open of late. We work also with faith-based organizations. You'll remember the summit that was held, led by the president. I know churches have been notorious of late, but since then we've seen churches of faith community, let me say, doing a lot of good work. Even now, we have another engagement in Limpopo where millions and millions are coming from that sector, supporting communities, not supporting government, but supporting communities, targeting the most poor, the vulnerable, the orphans, the widows, which is something good to see in our nation. And we're inviting everybody. I don't know if it's the spirit of the government of national unity that we are saying, come, let's work together. And I like your theme, Peter, to say hand in hand for better foods and a better future. We can all work together. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Some of because we're working well. We're working together as government. You know what? Some of these things that I'm highlighted, Mond will talk to them. If there was somebody from the department, it will say the same things, because we've got the technical working group at the national government. Now, at that level, we are sitting together with him, and some of the things that you will say, then those are some of the things that I would be saying. Now, since 2013, we have seen for the first time in 2024, where we have the National Food Security Survey. That was not only, it went further down to district level to say who are the vulnerable, who are the food insecure. You know, you have the surveys that were done by the State SA that would they would highlight these issues at the level of the province. We never had a system that would go down up to district level to say, you see, in the Cape Metropole, this area, that's where you have the high incidence of obesity, and then in other areas we've got high incidence of stunting. You know, that's the functional food system, but we never had that. That says that you can you can plan properly, because you know where the problematic areas are, instead of saying, okay, we've got a problem at the national level. But now the survey went further to say district and local level, this is where your problems are. And where there are issues of obesity and stunting in the same locality, what programs do you come up with to ensure that you sort the food security situation in that area? I think that is one of the highlights since the 2013 policy when it was passed. The 2018-2023 food security plan, it was a product of that policy. The food and nutrition security plan, you know, with all other sectors, I think it was also one of the highlights since the policy in 2013. Besides, we have what we call the Agriculture Agro-Processing Master Plan. You know, the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, it's got round tables. You've got your livestock round table, you've got your fruit and vegetable round table, your grain round tables. You know, and the round tables, are actually chaired by civil society, by commodity organizations. Government in those round tables plays a secretariat role. Now, if you're talking about your red meat round table, it's your commodity organization in that sector that chairs that round table. Now, it says that it directs development. No, in terms of red meat, to say now this is where development should go. You know, that's you know, when you're bringing other stakeholders on board. Before it would be like, you know, government leading, but in this instance you say government will play a coordinating role, but the sector plus the civil society are part of they are leading in that sector. Your vegetable roundtables, that's the same thing. It's the sector that's leading together with farmers. I'm part of the livestock roundtable. The chairperson there is a farmer who's part of NEPO. Now all the views, the contributions of the farmers into the sector then come through the chairperson, who's also a farmer. Now they also direct where development should take place. What are the issues in terms of policy? What needs to change? You know? I think it brought a broader stakeholders that we government was leading, but now they are leading in terms of development. The food systems transformation, like I said, Mandli just mentioned that you have civil society, you have NPOs, you have the academia that part of the work that we're doing in terms of food system transformation. The food system coordinating committee, it's based on the subcommittees. The subcommittees on the pathways. Each pathway has got a committee. It's got an action plan that's been developed outside government. It's government that plays in coordinating that role, and the national coordinating committee. Is those subcommittees that form the national coordinating committee, with government of course, but in those subcommittees, it's government that plays a secretarial role. You know, the involvement of stakeholders in terms of policy development now it's much higher compared to before the policy was approved by cabinet. Thank you.
Excuse me. May I make a contribution to the role players and who plays what role in the value chain? I agree that everybody has got a critical role to play in the value chain, but there needs to be differentiation as to what role each person should be playing. So, for example, who will make the decision to direct what is being produced and to make sure that that is healthy and focusing on providing for children primarily? For me, children is one of the biggest vulnerable groups in the country. So who takes that decision? And you're saying that the farmers chair the round tables. Now, from a technical perspective and a business perspective, that makes perfect sense because they're in that business all the time. But as far as policy decisions, are they the right people to make the policy decision if there's profit associated with it? Or who's going to make the decision? So if I can make a practical example, if we look at the FAO balance sheets, we would like to see that there's sufficient energy or foods produced that supply our energy intake. Starches, carbohydrates, grain-based kind of products, which we do. If you look at the FAO balance sheets, then you will see that it's more than 50% of the energy comes from the grains. And you rightly pointed out that meat, we're actually producing more than what we need. We are on par with Western countries in terms of the meat production. But when we look at nuts, pulses, legumes, vegetables, fruit, we are not achieving the requirements for a healthy life. Now, who's going to make that decision to say, we don't need more sugar to be planted, we need more vegetables to be planted? And who's going to do that? Who of the farmers can possibly do that? It's a difficult decision because you know there's a sugar plan, master plan. And my question would be, is that in the best interest of the country and the people in the country? From a socioeconomic, from an economic perspective, I can understand some of the arguments. Which one should trump the decision making? Health of the people?
Yeah.
Health of children? Or should we go with commercial benefits on one particular point? If I may add one point to that, I'm so glad you mentioned breastfeeding, because that's the basic food, the perfect food security measure for children between birth and 6 months of age. You know how many people in the country breastfeed their infants? It used to be 8%. There was one survey in 2016 which indicated that it has increased slightly.
Yeah,
Slightly.
23.
So the question is, why is this a problem? And I want to say, well, because there's a competition on the market for breastfeeding. Most people can breastfeed. Of course, there are exceptions, adopted children, people with physiological challenges. But then, if there's a commercial market available that use the profit to keep telling mothers that there's an easier solution for your problem, and they problematize natural development of children, then they convince everybody to use the commercial formula. But that's not truthful, because children go through certain development stages. They do need to communicate their needs. Some crying is normal. Yet, if you look at the adverts, it would tell you, if you don't want your child to cry, feed this. And I can tell you which mother will make that decision not to use the product because they're convincing me that that's what I need for my child, and I want to make the best decision. So I do have a critical question around the role of each role player within the value chain and the responsibilities of each one, and how much we allow certain stakeholders in the value chain.
Okay, very interesting. So this suggests we can have a functional agricultural industry that is thriving and generating and exporting certain commodities, but still have a hungry nation. Therefore, my view is that we need empowered communities to make choices on what to eat, so that if I have an option to drink water or a fizzy drink, then I can say no, I'll opt for a fizzy. For water to avoid sugar, you know. But beyond that, ensuring that at appropriate levels where there is a problem, there's interventions at the most critical level. Let me make a typical example. If our problems to nutrition is issues of dietary diversity at a community household level, can we not view perhaps agriculture as something that has to be commercial, big, and to solve our country's problem, but perhaps intervene at household community level such that issues of dietary diversity are addressed at that level? And then it's easier for people, because as long as we have people that are not producing food, there is no income to make those choices, they will opt for the easiest, which is mostly obesogenic foods and all sorts of things. So the role maker, who determines amongst the role players? I do believe if we have empowered communities, government can regulate whatever you regulate at whatever level, but critical communities, households can proper take care of children, feed their households and communities, and there's dietary diversity. And then we can eliminate some of these problems without necessarily looking at commercial agriculture, because at times you have different interests which can defeat the purpose of why we are fighting against hunger and poverty. Because for commercial agriculture, it's production at scale, profitable, high commodity crops that can generate income. The question is it nutritious for the needs of that child in that household? Should we be growing it on monoculture, large scale, or should we be opting for more ecologically sound production practices at a scale that can suit a household for subsistence, which means primary to consume and surplus to sell and generate extra income to buy, you know? So we don't need a complex food system that is looking at macro issues to the neglect of critical issues at a household level, which is making right food choices, dietary diversity, and eating healthy as a nation.
And I'd actually like to bring back that question of would it be better to regulate or advise producers to cheapen their prices, as we come to realize that it isn't exactly the customer's fault that they are eating unhealthily, as that is the cheaper alternative. So would it be better to advise and regulate prices, or would it be better to educate and do workshops, advertisements, campaigns to educate customers on how to grow their own food in a healthy way, or the healthier alternative?
I think Wade may want to add, because you mentioned something like this in the beginning. But I think, I mean, it's a matter of both is needed, but I also think you need to prioritize as to how effective that would be. Because to get back to your point, yes, ideally, everybody should have sufficient knowledge. Ideally, if everybody can produce some, would be wonderful. But you mentioned space, land, water, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Is it possible? If you find malnutrition amongst farm workers on those same commercial farms that produce those foods, then you ask the question, what equity do we have? Hand over to you.
So thank you for handing over, Zubi. It's also good, well placed to respond to it from civil society, of course. And a speaker before also mentioned about communities, it's not best for communities to produce their own food. So I mean, one can say while there are attempts from communities that's suffering from hunger, communities that's struggling communities within different provinces, there are attempts from these communities they are finding alternatives, they are finding ways to organize themselves. But this is still within this difficult circumstances and the lack of support from government, the lack of support from policies that's favorable to way how communities organize today. And so while these alternatives, are in place, and these difficult circumstances there's always the question around land. Now, question around land in South Africa is probably another topic, but it's important. We have to speak about land when we speak about a sustainable food systems and what these food systems can look like. And again, I think it's also value in mentioning this again. In my previous input, I mentioned that civil society is of the viewpoint that this is not a technical problem, but it's a political one. And for a country to address this, I mean, we should be ready to have the question or the conversation around power. Who makes the decisions? Who controls the land? So currently, these communities that we work with in civil society, access to land is an issue. Tenure is an issue. Access to the necessary services to support, access to water, access to seeds and other technical trainings for the communities is an issue, and there's a lack thereof. So while we do speak about these alternatives, and from civil society, why we take the position that it is more political and that we have to, for us it's about dismantling the system, like how do we put communities at the heart of this? And as a country, we shouldn't be seeing food as a commodity, but a human right. And really, how do we engage communities around these issues? From civil society, our political positioning, how we see things, how we see that real agrarian transformation could look like in a country like South Africa, is really of the basis of what we internationally, the alternative to food security, what we say is food sovereignty. So making food a human right, really focusing on localized food systems, and I think for me, more importantly, not just focusing on localized food systems, but also trying to have the conversation around community resource governance. So how do you put that the resources that communities need, like land, water, seeds, etc., back into the hands of the communities so that the communities can produce the food to feed their people.
Yeah, sorry, by the way, I was not suggesting all of you must produce your own food. But the essence is South Africa has different agroecological zones that has potential to feed our nation. And we also have the context of rural, urban, peri-urban settings. In the rural settings, you have arable, you have non-arable lands, but our average annual rainfall is good enough for us to at least produce food, sufficient food to feed this nation. So what we are advocating for, at least from where we are looking at this whole situation, is that the children in Eastern Cape must not die of malnutrition when the rural communities of Eastern Cape with so much land. We understand the issue of land access and so on and so forth. But some areas we have capacity. Let's utilize, let's explore that potential. Yeah, I wanted to just nudge in there. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe let me come in. I think my colleague Mondli mentioned the importance of empowered households to make decisions. I think for me that is key, because you know people need to to be empowered to discern between unhealthy and healthy foods. If people know healthy foods, probably they if that messaging comes out to say, this is, the healthy foods. This is what happens to your body when you eat healthy food, and that message is constant. If you go back to the COVID days, yeah, that messaging was very strong. You put a mask, social distance, you need to wash your hands and all that. I think that's the messaging that we need as a country to say. I'm not saying it's the be it all. There's a need for policy, but communities and households once empowered, they will be able to make the right decisions. But when it comes to production issues, in the department we have what we call the Comprehensive Agricultural Support Program. What we've done, we have the Comprehensive Producer Support Policy, which then categorizes farmers in terms of income. We've got the indigent, we've got the house subsistence, we've got the vulnerable, we've got subsistence, we've got smallholder, we've got niche, commercial, medium commercial, we've got commercial, and the mega. That's how we've categorized farmers in South Africa. And in terms of the Comprehensive Producer Support Policy, you say the vulnerable and the subsistence, that you support indefinitely, because you're trying to support production at the household level. What is the kind of support that you provide to the vulnerable and the subsistence? You provide them with seeds, fertilizer, pesticides and herbicides, and mechanization. Those are the packages that support household food production. Of course, I also agree that the issue of food sovereignty is very important, which then you start talking about agroecology. There's something that needs to be promoted to attain food sovereignty. You're saying use your local materials that are adaptable to local area to be able to produce food. Those land races, they're adaptable to that locality. You don't really need to go and buy seed, because for you to go and buy seed, you need to have money and all that. But the disease regime in that area, your land races are used to that. They have adapted to that environment. Now that's when you start talking about your green manure and all this. Now you start talking about green ecology that says look after your soils. Soil health becomes very important. I'm just saying, when you look at in terms of the expenditure of the Department of Agriculture, in terms of farmer support, you're not talking infrastructure, you're talking the provision of production inputs. It has touched a lot of households, and it will continue to touch many households, because it's in the policy that says you're vulnerable, subsistence, you support indefinitely in supporting food security. And in the packages that we are giving to households, it's mostly your vegetables. It's not grains. Your vegetables, small stock, your chickens, your rabbits, to ensure food diversity and consumption of healthy foods. I think that's just I wanted to make that contribution. Thank you.
Now, one last question on the line. So I've heard that different land produces different things. For instance, what can be produced in the Eastern Cape is not the same as what can be produced in Mpumalanga. Though water may rain on both lands, it produces differently. So how do we balance that out, especially if we want that land to cater towards that community? How would we balance the food that they intake and balance their diet?
If we just been to Brazil to look at the Brazilian model. The Brazilian model says, similar to our country, we got different agroecological zones that are able to produce different kinds of crops. What you produce in Limpopo, you don't produce in the Western Cape. Yeah? But there is a replacement of what you can produce in Limpopo that you can produce in this. That is indigenous to the Western Cape. And the Brazilian model says, in terms of nutritional content of the food that's produced in that local in the agroecological zone that is adapted that produce that crop, as long as it's nutritious. That you don't have to be, their school nutrition program. You don't have a menu that is the same for all the provinces. Different provinces produce different crops, but the different crops that are providing the same nutrients might be different crops, but providing similar nutrients. And those crops that are encouraged to be planted, you've got the indigenous crops that have been neglected. And those indigenous crops, we know that they are nutrition dense. They are very good in terms of nutrition. Encourage the planting of those crops. If you look at what we're trying to do in terms of the food systems transformation, we say at the local level, indigenous crops that they've been planted, that they've been neglected. Now, it's time to go back to those crops because they are nutritious. You can assist you in terms of malnutrition that is being experienced in the country. I'm just saying it might be crops that are produced in the Eastern Cape, they will never be a produce. But they are equivalent in all these provinces. Then that provide the same kind of nutrients that can deal with food insecurity. Thank you.
Yeah. I like the driest region of our country, the Northern Cape. When you drive there, it's like, what do people eat here? You know they are the leading lamb producers in our nation. Yeah? The best sheep and goats come from that province. So the essence here is if we have a functional food system, we need to make this food available to all parts of the nation. How so? The markets are working without making food way expensive, fuel prices and energy issues. And we don't create such a big divide between the rural and urban, because if in my Bergville town, a small town I come from in KZN, for me to go buy something, the return fee for the taxi is over 100 rands. It means if I get a child support grant, it's minus 100 rands. There is nothing I can get locally. So these factors for me, whatever we produce in Limpopo, avocados, tomatoes, Cape Town doesn't have good soils like Limpopo. It's sandy here. I don't know how.
Environment.
But the essence is you should be able to eat tomatoes and avocados in this part of the country, in as much as we don't produce sheep everywhere. Sheep don't like coastal areas. They prefer drier. That's why they do well in Northern Cape. But let's move it around. Let's have a functional value chain that can enable us to have diverse, nutritious, cheaper food as a nation. If we fail to do that, then we're in trouble.
We are in trouble because we do fail to do that. And I can tell you that comes from a long time back, and it's existing now. And one of the problems is the transportation cost from one area to another area. But to go back to the point on education, I believe in education, and it is absolutely critical. Each person needs to be empowered to make the right decision, but there are limitations to when you can utilize your knowledge. If you have only a very limited resource, you can make only the decision that fits that resource. You can't you don't have more. Therefore, sometimes, even though it's the best decision within the circumstances, it might still not be a great decision. But that's within your limitations. But I want to elevate this issue of education and information to who is the duty bearer for that. Because education is also a right. Who's the duty bearer to provide that information? And if I may go back to your point about health education and how the health message was spread during COVID, may I ask you whether you know what the budget allocation for that education campaign was? And if I may have that budget for breastfeeding promotion, please, then we won't have a problem. So unfortunately, I don't think the duty bearer puts the relevant resources that's required to do that education at all the levels where it's needed. And I can give some examples. Nutrition and health education is part of the curriculum. How much of it gets implemented and how often in the schools it's not a priority? That I can tell you from all the surveys and the research that we have done. Is it less important, more important than mathematics or science? Or is it as important but on a different level? So that's one example. I have made the breastfeeding example and the lack of budget to promote breastfeeding. Similarly on healthy food choices. And can we rightly put the responsibility for all of the healthy decisions on the consumer when they're working against bigger powers? When last were you in a supermarket? You want to go in and you just want to buy a breakfast cereal. What are you faced with in the supermarket? Rows and rows of very pretty packages, lovely pictures, and especially if your child is going with you, it's going to be a problem because they would want that one, and you might not be able to afford that one. So in terms of knowledge, remember, an individual should have the knowledge, but there are other powers that may not allow them to make those choices every day. And who is the duty bearer in making sure that that education, that information gets to people? If you look at budgets, then we are the government. If I say we, then I mean we as the government are not fulfilling our role. And we're allowing too much space for other role players. And that's why I get to the final conclusion that in some situations, regulation is unavoidable. And regulation is actually the only way that you can try and improve the food environment for the citizens of the country.
Now, what can we learn from recent evidence and experiences about how stakeholders have been working together for zero hunger in municipalities and provinces?
I want to pick up from the example of how we've tried to support and assist government with this area of our expertise, which is on evidence. And our National Household Food and Nutrition Security Survey was an example of that. And I think we have already heard the support and the value of that. It has enabled us to speak more confidently in this conversation, at least, on what we call localized indigenous food systems and the value thereof and the importance thereof to ensure a nutritional diet for everybody that's safe, that's healthy, and so forth and so on. And I think that's been our contribution from the HSRC and the Human Sciences Research Council. We've also made other contributions, but these have all been far more localized, especially our work with some of the civil society groups in also empowering them with the necessary evidence that can steer and guide their own programs of how they support communities in ensuring that they're healthy and that they consume and produce food in ways that will not harm the environment. But our main concern continues to be access to that information, which is a spillover from our conversation up till now, because we've been mentioning, I think, three very important areas of work. The first one is the idea of localized indigenous food availability, access, use and consumption. But then there has also been the importance of what is referred to as empowered decision making. So empowered decision making indeed relies on information, and it also relies on the ability to utilize that information appropriately. So at the HSRC, my team of researchers, we have developed an area of work, what we refer to as transformative human development approaches to change. Now, with this approach, we say we've got to break away from the old approach that's merely concerned with what we call productivity and efficiency. Professor Swart raised that already, profit, until we all go to sleep, right? And so that approach is the production efficiency approach. That is the traditional approaches to food security. We are saying we need more holistic and integrated approaches that emphasize this notion of what is referred to as empowerment. Empowerment refers to agency and the ability of people to make informed decisions. Now, how can you make informed decisions if you are unable to read a food label? How are you able to make informed decisions if you are unable to distinguish between a healthy and unhealthy option? It is very, very difficult. And so we are compelled to get into an area of work that Professor Swart also raised. There are tensions. And Wade, from the civil society perspective, made this a strong emphasis. There are tensions and power inequalities, even in the domain of information. Information control, information access, and bombarding society with information. The advertising and marketing industry is very, very strong. It's very, very powerful. And if you have a child that cannot read a food label of bad products, right, like chips and these things, the child is not concerned with that. It's tasty. Yeah, it's nice. But also the packaging looks really very, very attractive. So those kind of colorful packages that you've got all on the shop shelves, they serve a purpose. They're pieces of information. They're pieces of communication. And they want to capture your imagination and the attention. But that is only the upfront part. You don't go to the food and nutrition label. And so we increasingly finding ourselves where we impoverished at the level of accessing information. Accessing information. And the final part, I think, of the conversation today has been aligned to information, the investment of resources in the appropriate areas. How do you spread national budgets to these respective areas? We've helped the department on that front by assisting with what is referred to the costing of the national plan. We've produced a costing, and we've discovered rather glaring evidence from that costing, which really went down into all areas, initially allocated in 2017, 2018 to departments and agencies and entities that will help fund the implementation of the plan. Number one, I'm very happy that we have moved into the next iteration of the 5-year plan, 2024 to 2029. So that's brilliant. But what came up was that we could barely meet 50% of the actual costing that we identified in 2017, 2018. As a consequence, the first iteration of the plan fell way short of its initial objectives and targets. Now, there's a lesson in there. How do we close that? But because we had access to data, we could drill down to the different areas. And the very localities that are coming up here as the targeting points, or the localities where you've got high levels of food and nutrition insecurity, in other words, extreme levels of malnutrition, these are also the areas where there are no resources available, where there are no money is available to help fund these interventions. And so we are confronted with power inequalities on decision making. Professor Swart's opening statement was that who makes the decision? Ultimately, is it the government with its regulatory power and instruments, or is it industry with its profit power? I think that is the contradiction or tension that we are confronted with.
Very interesting issues at play. We have heard from Peter in as far as the national policy, legislative environment, and how we work together. But critical to that also, we have partners like the FAO, wherein we are looking at beyond the national level, what's happening at the provincial level in districts, to make sure that those strategic objectives also finds articulation in provincial food and nutrition security plans, so that the people of the Eastern Cape can say, this is the situation in our province, this is what we are dealing with, and this is how we resolve child malnutrition. Area specific and targeted at the present problems in each area, all right? Of course, aligned to whether you are rural, urban, you have production capacity, or you are dealing with other issues. So that's an area of work that we are enhancing, supported by the FAO, to say every province must have its own provincial plan, must have its own coordination structure. Now, the recent outbreak of foodborne illnesses associated with the food coming from tuck shops in rural communities, in some instances run by foreign nationals, has also brought a different dimension to the need for looking at issues of food safety and quality assurance in food environments, even at community level. So there is, of course, the compliance enforcement wherein it's evidently not sufficient, because we wouldn't have lost 25 children, 25 kids dying because of what they've consumed is reflecting a serious problem. So we are now putting a lot of effort there to ensure that there is food safety and quality assurance in all our spaces. We'll be launching the toolkit, especially for supporting civil society organizations, DSD center-based feeding programs, but also making sure that we work with our environmental health practitioners to ensure that those spaces have certificates of acceptability for food handling premises in line with the norms and regulations. I'm by no means suggesting that government can regulate this entire problem, right? We're working with the CGSA on some aspects, food waste management, and we are also looking at issues of what is it that we can do with the industry beyond what we see as naughty tendencies on issues of advertising, especially your sweets on the aisles towards the tills and leaving you no option when the baby is crying. You know, some of those things perhaps we can engage, and the industry has been quite positive. We have just last week looked at generating better livelihoods for grant recipients, because we know that all those 250 billion of grant recipients 60% goes to food. So can we also have the industry contribute to assist us as a nation resolve some of those problems, which is encouraging. We will closely monitor that, but coverage is very critical, and ensuring that we allocate resources where it matters most, education our nation to make informed decisions.
Now, as we near the end of our session, I'd like to invite the panelists to share us quickly how we can move forward, in which areas can food value chain actors work together for zero hunger in South Africa.
Yeah, maybe I can sit today. So again, just also something that I think is also critical for our conversation that we are having here, and this is just taking us back to the previous question, that's of course fine, is so the experience within communities is that what's currently happening in communities is that resources in communities are shrinking, and we're experiencing this resource competition within communities where land parcels are shrinking, mining companies coming into certain communities for mining opportunities, and this has impacts on different communities. And I think the lessons that at ground level that we experience here is that when we do speak about systems, when we do speak about food systems, we cannot just speak about food systems when we speak about agriculture specific on land or inland, and that it should be a multi-sectoral approach. So we have to, or we need different government departments within this conversation. Mining communities are affected where mining is being prioritized over agricultural community lands that's available for the people, for the communities. But then also in fisher communities where fisher communities are finding it even more difficult to survive based off certain models that's presented in terms of how fishing is regulated. And within these different structures, within these different communities, we are finding it more and more difficult. So in terms of the question that you just asked is, of course, from civil society, there's this deep cry for justice. And when you speak about justice, it's food justice, it's land justice, it's about people's and communities' dignity. But there's a real, to advance what we're currently doing, and we spoke about COVID-19, we had a few examples on the lessons from COVID-19, is that pockets of these alternatives at community level emerged. While the current dominant system, food system was, can say, failing us at the time, you had small-scale farmers within these rural or communities that stepped up and fed our communities because we relied on them. So to a certain extent, I would say at the moment is there are these pockets emerging, there are alternatives, and there's also the need for more, it should be within these communities, we should get our research support like these models to unpack it. What's the potential of these models? What do we need to further strengthen this? why do we need to further support this? Because these are alternatives currently emerging at local level, but within these difficult circumstances that I was referring to, with no policies that backs up these kind of models, and our communities are organizing today. So this is, I would say that as we should collaborate, but also more than collaboration, but the solidarity between everyone, between different departments and stakeholders within this value chain. And we have to really look at how we can strengthen our localized food systems, strengthen our local economies, strengthen our indigenous localized food systems. There's knowledge. How do we make use of this knowledge? How do we get the relevant support, trainings, information to strengthen these alternatives at local level? But then also, in order to achieve this, there is an existing model, there is an existing approach, and globally, and this is what we refer to agroecology. But yet, from civil society and engaging different stakeholders and role players around agroecology, and as a alternative model to the current industrial agriculture, is it's something that focuses on localized food system. It's something that not just focuses on production, on food production, but it's also a model that focuses on how communities organize. How do you connect that small-scale farmers, the producers within a community that produces a safe, affordable, and ecological sound food, and how do you connect that producers with that consumers of that communities? And first focus on the communities as food, as a nutritious food for the community, and then see how we can then further that resource. How do we localize that? How do we minimize the distance in terms of traveling? And I think while this approaches and work is being done, there's always the need for more detailed research around this, because we still have a lot of questions in terms of produce. What can we grow where? Is that the conversation that we should be having? If sugarcane is not suitable for the Western Cape, is it just maybe because on the amount that we are producing? Isn't it possible just to have a lesser amount when we do speak about agroecology in communities where it is not just a monocrop, not just a single produce, not just a single product, but a diversity of to feed the community? And I think the last one is also ensuring fairness in terms of equity, access. And this again brings us back, and I think this is the position from civil society, is when we do speak about producing our own food as communities, when we do speak about agroecology as an alternative, when we do speak about food sovereignty, it starts with having access to land, having access to water and the necessary resources to produce our food. So how between the different sectors, civil society, the departments, research, academia, how can we work together and develop these models or strengthen these models so that we can use it for real evidence-based advocacy when it comes to this necessary change within our systems. Yeah.
If I can add to the local production and how to optimize that, there is one way in which we can optimize local production more than what we currently are, and that is through government purchasing, because government is the biggest buyer of food through hospital feeding, school feeding, prisons, all of them. But unfortunately, within the school feeding system, it's not working well. Because it comes down to the system of procurement within each province. And there are several challenges in the process of local production and small-scale production. And that's exactly small scale. They don't always have sufficient supply at exactly the right moment for the need at that local level, whether that's a school, whether that's a hospital, doesn't matter. So you do need some organizational system where, for example, a few local producers can actually collaborate to cover each other's back and stand in when there is a need for a certain supply. And then we do need to work on our procurement policies. And And sometimes it's not only the policy, because we have incorporated some of the Brazil example in our procurement policy. So the words are there, locally procured, but it didn't say locally produced. It said locally procured, which means that they're buying from the supermarket that's in the local town. Now, that might not be such a bad thing because it keeps some of the money within the in the local economy, but the intention was in actual fact to stimulate local production and to provide a livelihood opportunity for those small-scale producers. So we currently do have a big system and several small systems, but bridging the gap between those, it is still a major challenge.
Interesting. We are of the view that there is immediate things we have to deal with, ensure that everyone have access to food. As we do that, we don't neglect issues of ensuring that it's nutritious food, children are growing well, to be productive adults, and then and invest in behavior change, communication, nutrition education in our nation. Countries that have resolved hunger challenges have not built complex systems, but they have ensured that there are nations like India, they believe in their indigenous foods, they grow them locally, including with issues of maternal care, health,
Yeah.
and care for the children to make sure that they, right from breastfeeding, they grow to be eating healthy. And then there is, of course, in the medium to long-term issues of unemployment, economy that is not growing, a lot of people that are not employed. We have to tackle those problems. I do believe that if we do not resolve those, of course, the natural disasters that we have seen will continue to put pressure on us. We had COVID, avian flu, foot and mouth, floods. They keep coming, all right? It's not just disasters. They are impacting on the most poor and the vulnerable, and also shrinking those options for them to have economic means and even access to putting food on the table. So the coverage of social protection is good, but we have to be careful that we're a developmental state, not a welfare state. So countries like Kenya have built their national school nutrition program at the back of a strong local produced, not by big players, small guys, but aggregated, agro-processed, vitamin-enriched, fortified, certified for the National School Nutrition Program, which means it creates livelihoods, opportunities, there is local economic development, people are employed, but the nation is eating good, healthy food. So those are some of the examples, not from afar, but just here in SADC. In as much as we learn from what Brazil and everybody's doing. So those for me becomes very critical. Peter will talk to public procurement programs, but the essence is the National School Nutrition Program is a 10 billion, program. Social grants, it's 250 billion. Is that not creating livelihoods, opportunities? Is that not creating procurement opportunities for emerging food producers to participate and resolve some of the economic challenges we have as a nation. So yes, indeed, there's a lot of opportunities we need to explore to build a food-secured nation, resolving socio-economic challenges that we are faced with, and yeah. So it's a lot of work, but we appreciate the work, evidence-based policy making, and we need everybody. The industry should not see government as a school principal. They need to work with us to realize that we have to resolve the problems. Unfortunately, we at times, Peter, have to confront each other about the differences. Just yesterday, I was working with Hope Worldwide SA, looking at generating better livelihoods for grant recipients. To say, young girls fell pregnant, they are receiving child support grant. What do we do with them to take them out of that poverty trap? Exploring, could they go back to the education system, works programs, or entrepreneurship? And Hope Worldwide SA is a partner to social development, working on that. Those are the type of the examples and collaboration we want to see growing so that we all build this nation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so for us, we need evidence-informed transformation of food value chains. So we accept that, but that doesn't explain to us at this point how we're going to arrive at such a point and what this future may look like. So we are learning from different models and frameworks that are emerging, all subscribing to this idea of evidence-informed decision-making. So I can mention 2 or 3 of them. The first one is very popular within civil societies, called solidarity economy models and frameworks that really ground in these kind of principles of overcoming, destitution, marginalization, and all people working together. You have similar models on the other extreme, what I call the other extreme because it's been very much embraced by the corporate sector, which is called the so-called circular economy models. Now, circular economy models have now been illustrated through several examples that, you ensure that you produce enough to feed other people and have zero harms to the environment, and a whole host of other really altruistic objectives, things that you can support that are really beautiful in terms of a healthier nation, healthy environment, healthy planet. There is also the one that we've been working on very closely, which is referred to as the One Food model, and the One Food model is derived from the One Health global model promoted by the World Health Organization. And this is also an integrated, holistic approach to these transitions. There are a couple of gaps in a lot of these models. In the main model that is really very popular, which is the so-called circular economy model, it fails to address issues around what is referred to as structural inequalities. All those matters that we placed on the conversation here, the power imbalances, between different entities within a local economy and how you're going to address them. If you don't overcome those power imbalances, you are basically just reproducing inequality. So how do you break the chain of inequality reproduction? For that, you need a completely different approach to what we frame in our group as equitable and ecological food value chains. And these principles in that approach will enable us to fill the content of of the evidence that we're going to produce, the content of how we're going to interact. It will shift that to a completely new level. even solidarity economy models will require similar kinds of principles along which it's going to have to work, because the structural inequalities in the room, they may not be visible, they may be invisible, but they are there. And any model that tries to evade or tries to escape from the structural inequalities prevalent in society, those models are unlikely to succeed. And so therefore we need evidence to better understand the nature, the different phases of these structural inequalities, and how these structural inequalities actually drive individual decision making and what's referred to as individual choices. Because it's very difficult, very, very difficult, and the evidence is out there, for anyone to find a job if industry is not going to employ you. So the problem is not really with searching for a job. There are other constraints in the actual job absorption capacity of the economy, which is a structural issue. Because a person who's unemployed is not making the decision on the actual employment. It is somebody else who's employing you, right? And so there are real problems in transitioning to an alternative view of the world and how to make it a reality. And as the HSRC, as a science-based entity and institution in the social sciences, we are all very excited about contributing from our side evidence, scientifically grounded decision-making. And scientifically grounded decision-making will be critical for the transition of food value chains toward zero hunger. That's our view.
You know, I'm thinking about you mentioned the school feeding program. You know, the school feeding program, your community nutrition centers, correctional facilities, and clinics and hospitals. According to the Food and Nutrition Security Plan, those who have identified as institutional markets that should support your small and subsistence farmers in terms of procurement from those farmers. When we did the evaluation of the plan, 2023, we actually, the evaluation said we actually failed in terms of the implementation of that plan. And we're saying, but where do we start? Because you've got all these institutional markets that you are unable to penetrate. You're talking about your procurement systems within departments and what. How do you then transform those procurement systems? Now, it's a start. You are saying what we've got what you call homegrown school feeding program. The homegrown school feeding program is nothing else than the linkage of smallholder subsistence farmers to schools, to the school nutrition program. And as much as we're now on a nationwide drive to say the school nutrition program, the budget is of about 10.3 billion, needs to be should contribute towards the development of local businesses. And those local businesses, in this sense, you are talking about your subsistence smallholder farmers, those that are around schools. Now, that's what you're talking about when you're talking about the government procurement model. Now, you say, let's start with that. You still have your CNDs, you still have clinics and hospitals. But when you're talking to this, to our counterparts, they will say, how do you ensure consistency of supply? You cannot have a situation where kids do not eat because the farmer did not supply. How do we ensure that? That the farmer supplies consistently foods of good quality, required quantities. Now we're saying now we are now on a nationwide drive to say let's start here. Government departments, let's meet. We need to make this one possible, because the plan conjoins us to make that that the reality. It's just that when you look at it, you might say teething problems. You know about that plan when we developed it, but it's something that is doable, that we need to do to empower the local farmers, and that's something that we are doing at the moment. To say, let's empower smallholder and subsistence farmers through this government program. Now, the Department of Education, in making sure that the budget supports the development of this small businesses. In their grant agreement, they've set aside in their grant agreement to provinces. They've said 30% of their budget should go to smallholder and subsistence farmers for the procurement of fruits and vegetables as a start. You know, you're talking about short value chains. Those are the short value chain products. When you're talking about grains, you know, you still need to process and what. But it's quick wins. Those are the ones that you can, you know, win quickly, and we have smallholder and subsistence farmers supply. But on the at the national level, how we think we could transform the food system in the country. I've talked about the pathways that we have chosen as the country. This was a consultative process that started in 2021. That's how we chose. This was a national, you know, we had about 10 consultative process sessions with provinces, and we had the national consultation workshop. Now, the 4 pathways that we've chosen as a country, we believe if we all contribute to that, we'll go a long way towards attending to the issue of food insecurity and nutrition and malnutrition in this country. Let's rally around the Food and Nutrition Security Coordinating Committee to make a difference. Ultimately, we would like to have the food system transformation strategy in the country, to see how then do you bring in the businesses, how do you bring civil society, or bring labor, farmers together, so that you develop a strategy that will be able to at least transform the food system in the country. I'm thinking, I think we are on the right path. We still need people who can contribute to those pathways. There are committees in those pathways. They've developed action plans, and I think if we support the work that's been done in those pathways, the work of the Food System Transformation Committee, I think we'll go a long way towards addressing the issue of food and nutrition security in the country.
Thank you. Well, thank you again to our panelists, Mondle Mbele, Peter Ramoloja, Wade Parker, Professor Rena Swart, and Dr. Peter T. Jacobs. It's for sharing their invaluable insights and experiences. For those interested in delving deeper, feel free to reach out to our panelists via the HSRC, and be sure to follow our YouTube channel for more discussions that are pivotal topics such as this. Thank you all for participating in today's session, and for our viewers for joining us on HSRC Connect. It's been a pleasure on both ends. Now let's continue the conversation and work together hand in hand for better foods and a better future.